The president hiked tariffs on imports from China to 145% last week. For more, we go to United States Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. China holds about $1.5 trillion in assets in this country. About half of them are U.S. treasuries. In the past, you've spoken about strategic decoupling from China and acknowledged it would cause some short-term pain. Are you trying to get China to sell some of those assets? Is that part of your goal as well?
That's not part of this plan. President Trump has a global program to try to reshore American manufacturing and address the trade deficit. It's a global issue. The only reason we're really in this position right now is because China chose to retaliate. So many other countries affirmatively said they did not want to retaliate. We want to negotiate with the Americans, and the Chinese made a different decision. So it's not a plan to do that. It was a Chinese decision. They have agency here. Well, remember, China's been selling off treasuries for some time. It's not a brand new development. The treasuries market will fluctuate. I'm not the Treasury Secretary, so I'm not the best poised to talk about that. But I think the issue is we've become so dependent on China, and for so many decades we haven't had fair market access. So again, we see China taking action, implementing their policy to try to be less tied up with us as well. So it's not surprising to see them making these kinds of moves. We obviously have to be prepared on our part to have a resilient economy. We certainly need to have semiconductors and the downstream electronics supply chain move to the United States. What happened is, it's not really an exception, that's not even the right word for it. What happened is this type of supply chain moved from the tariff regime for the global tariff, the reciprocal tariff, and it moved to the national security tariff regime, where we have studies ongoing for pharmaceuticals, for semiconductors, metals, etc. So it's not that they won't be subject to tariffs geared at reshoring, they'll just be under a different regime. It's shifting from one bucket of tariffs to a different bucket of potential tariffs.
So that is
subject to study by the Commerce Department. For now, they're subject to a 20% tariff. They're subject to a 20% tariff that's on China.
But isn't that still the Swiss cheese situation you said you were trying to avoid?
I would just disagree with that, Margaret. We have two different tariff programs. You have the global reciprocal tariff getting at the trade deficit, and you have critical sector national security tariffs, where we have tariffs in place on autos, steel, and aluminum, and we have them coming on semiconductors in the supply chain, pharmaceuticals, lumber, copper, etc. They're just different approaches to do it. We have to be much more deliberate about the semiconductor supply chain, because we don't even import semiconductors as such that much, right? They go into downstream products. So we have to be very careful, and we want the whole supply chain here, not just one product. Well, for the national security tariffs, you have to do an investigation in order to impose the tariffs. That's just legal process. That's how we do it. That's how it was done for steel and aluminum, autos, etc.
Right, but you've decided the outcome.
Investigations for those. No, we have not. We have not. That's why they're exempt. That's why they don't have a tariff covered right now, because you have to go through the investigation to determine the outcome.
Okay.
We expect there will have to be some kind of tariff on that, but we have to go through the investigation, figure out what's appropriate, and that's a Commerce Department function to do that. So our view, Margaret, is that currency manipulation or misalignment, whatever you want to call it, that can have a negative impact on U.S. exporters and unfairly advantage foreign exports into the United States. In the USMCA and in the Japan-U.S. deal from the first Trump term, we had chapters with the parties committing not to do currency manipulation. The Treasury Department has a statute to avoid that, so we certainly are in these kinds of discussions with these countries to see if they're willing to make these types of commitments as well.
That's a pretty big ask.
Well, the Japanese agreed to it in the first Trump term. The Canadians and the Mexicans agreed to it. This is something that periodically has happened over the years. Countries have had to revalue to make sure they aren't giving artificial competitive advantage to their exports. I mean, it's a big ask because we're in a various situation. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit that Biden left us with. It's the highest in human history, and currency is certainly part of that. Well, I'm considering that we have 90 days. Before April 2nd, we were already having many talks with other countries because everyone knew tariffs were coming. This was not some secret. Everyone knew, and so we already were in conversations with several countries. It's going to be up to these countries to come to the table, continue coming to the table, and make these kinds of offers. I mean, the reality is we're working around the clock, day and night, sharing paper, receiving offers, and giving feedback to these countries with respect to how they can better achieve reciprocal trade with the United States.